All right, it is February 14. Happy Valentine's, everyone. We've got a few things to get through today. First up, it looks like we've got Shane on the list. I guess I'll hand it off to you, Shane.
This was kind of just like a question that I wanted to put down. So if we have more agenda to go through, I can wait till the end, but otherwise.
No, this is great. We've got a fairly light agenda. I say that every time and I'm wrong, but let's just go with it.
That's kind of why I was thinking it, but all right, it's probably pretty quick anyway. So we've talked recently about policy and how policy should work ultimately to like deal with things that are a little bit implementation specific. The most recent example in the sync was we talked about use a policy to define the load balancing behavior of backend refs for HTTP route, right? How far have we talked about like using policy for implementation specific, I'll say general configurations for gateways? Like, have other people been, or was it intended for policy to be something where like, okay, I deploy a gateway and here's my policy for how that gateway will do its logs. Was that intended? That level of configuration?
That feels like a pretty good use case for me. Like, we're probably not going to want to put, it feels, so for me, I've always considered policy to be a way to put, I mean, we spent a lot of time on the sort of the override and default behavior, but it's a way to put settings that you can override or default that you want to be able to bucket by gateway, but that we probably wouldn't bring into the upstream API. And so, logging, sure, that seems like, I don't feel like we would put, I don't think it's that useful to have like a standard logging stanza, but having a way to sort of say, it feels like it could be, seems like it might be useful in my book as well to be able to put that at the gateway class level, even to say any gateways under this gateway class should log to this log sync or whatever. That feels like a great example.
Okay, fair enough. So that's kind of what I was thinking, but I'm curious, is anybody actually doing stuff like that right now?
I actually have
because we have a ton of configuration options theoretically that in like traditional deployments of our gateway, it's just a myriad options. And I'm just I'm wrestling with wanting to make sure I make good choices for how we would say, okay, post a gateway. You want that gateway to be provisioned by the controller. Here's all the different configuration options you want for it. And right now policy looks like it.
Yeah, so for GK, we have, with Ingress, we had a separate resource that was similar in concept to policy. It was called Backend Config. You can look up the docs for it, but we're basically recreating the configuration that was available there in policy resources. For example, we'll have a LB policy as a generic catch-all for a variety of policy, and then some other more targeted ones. So I don't think we have one specific to logging yet, but
logging was just an example I thought was generic enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great example, but that kind of thing is definitely where we've taken it.
Okay.
One other way I think policies can be used is for chunks of configuration that you want to reference repeatedly. So you can change it one place and have it affect many other places. You might want to do, logging's an example, but maybe you want to do something like, you might want to create policies for like your TLS settings, maybe supported ciphers and minimum version. You don't want to go through and change every listener or every gateway where when you need to make like a corporate change for, again, like common one I've run into is ciphers, where suddenly we've found a weakness in a specific cipher suite. And so you need to eliminate that.
Yeah, I literally have an item on my post-it note thing where I keep my things that I need to remind myself about to write an example API for doing TLS minimum version using policy, which I think would be, we could even have that would be one that I was kind of thinking that we would have that as like an example of how a worked example of this is how you would write a policy. This is, and here's the policy objects, and here's what the YAML looks like when you use it, and have all of those examples in the upstream repo so that we have like a way to talk about this. It seems like you're all running ahead of where I'm up to because it's a little, it's not on the top of my list.
Cool. All right. Sounds like I'm on the right track. I just wanted to double check because I didn't want to be doing something that's like wildly different from what everybody else is doing. And I feel like policy has been vague enough. It felt worth asking.
Underspecified at the moment. That's why, yeah, I wanted to, that was why I have art to do it to specify something to talk about it. But
Yeah, it sounds like a good doc.
I just want to say thank you for bringing this up, and I think it's worth maybe this is a good use of discussions on GitHub, but I am very curious what others are doing or planning on doing for policy. I agree that it would be great if we were all planning on doing something resembling the same thing, following the same patterns. And you're right that it is kind of vague and wide open right now. So making sure that we're all interpreting things the same way would be great.
Yeah, concur. Because this is making me think of a couple things. So we have been thinking about policy very similarly, Shane, is that it's a way to add a lot of implementation details around traffic and how to shape traffic or how to shape the data plane, so to speak. But
Yeah, that's
I'm also thinking about, but also I'm thinking about logging this example, so like maybe logging content or encodings or things of that nature. I've been thinking belong in parameters ref, is that thing that shapes like the function of the data plane and not necessarily the traffic that goes through it. So where are we thinking the boundary exists between policy and parameters ref? Because I might be off base on my interpretation there.
I think that's a really good question that we don't have a good answer for. Like we put the spots in there for us to use, but I don't think we've ever had this literal discussion before. I think off the top of my head, it feels to me like what you said resonated with what I kind of expected the gateway class parameter ref to be. That feels like, in my mind, a gateway class is like close to one-to-one, not always, but a gateway class and a controller are pretty, there's a reasonably close binding between a gateway class and a controller. And so the gateway class parameter ref in my mind is for something where you say every gateway that fits into this bucket is going to have these overarching settings set is the parameters ref, or the control, it configures the controller that then manages the gateways for you. Whereas the policy is about configuring bits on the gateways or the routes or something like that. That feels to me to be roughly, that's pretty poorly explained, I think, but that feels to me my rough idea. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so that reflects. Okay, we are being a little bit squishy here, but I think there's room for being squishy. But yeah, that reflects that of how I'm thinking about it. Okay. Yeah, this is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd add that for GK, we have a fairly straightforward mapping here. For us, we can look at it and say this is like a class of load balancer, essentially, because we're translating these gateways to load balancers. So you might have regional XLB L7 or whatever, right? That is a well-known class of load balance in our case. I think kind of what Nick was referring to also makes a lot of sense too. This is a class or a well-known configuration of an instance of our controller. This is a well-known configuration or set of configurations that we use for Contour, whatever vendor. I think these are the kinds of things that you set once and forget. They're not things that change frequently. So for again, our implementation of gateway class, we're looking at these as basically templatized concepts that apply only at create. So this is what it meant to be a regional L7 XLB when we created this gateway. We don't expect them to change very much, but if some variation did change, that would be in the next gateway created with that class. Whereas policy, I think, is very much going to be more broadly used, and something that you would expect when a policy changes, it affects the things that it's referring to immediately. That's my view, but this is clearly, we could use some more docs here because, yeah, this is confusing.
Added on the huge pile of things that we could use more docs about, right?
Yeah, so maybe a note there, because like I now see like an intersecting set, right? So to speak in like Nginx parlance, right? I see parameters ref govern your worker processes, and then I see policy governing whatever is in your stream or HTTP block or your locations, regexes and matches like that. But then logging is such a great example because I see that's where the intersection is. I might want my access logs configured parameter ref because that's the persona who's touching access logs. But then there's other logging formats or other logs or trace logs that I might want to apply to particular routes of traffic independently. Okay, I think there's some nuance here, but this is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important as well for us to think about how this would work for, non-layer 7 controllers. And like, I think Rob, obviously GKE load balancer is a good example of a non-layer, not only a layer 7 controller, but yeah, I mainly write a layer 7 controller, so it's easy to forget, but it is important for us to remember that this API is about layer 4 as well. And so yeah, we've got to think about those sort of things. In terms of, I think that the canonical example for policy is still timeouts. And the reason that is the canonical example is everybody has timeouts. Nobody does in the same way. And exactly what timeouts you have and all that sort of stuff is so implementation dependent that we can't build a generic thing. But it's really common that you would want to have, you'd want to be able to say the default client timeout for whatever value of client timeout you actually mean, the default client timeout for everything under this gateway is 5 seconds or something like that. And then and then we have this mechanism of defaults and overrides where if you put a default at the gateway level, then HTTP routes can override it with some other mechanism, or you can attach another policy to the HTTP route that override that. So I'm using the words wrong. They can specify a different default that will take precedence over the high layer default, because defaults operate in a more specific beats less specific. Overrides operate the other way, and so if you put an override at a gateway, that will override the timeout setting for all HTTP routes. So an example of doing that would be, I don't want people to be able to set an infinite client timeout because I'm running a shared layer 7 proxy, and having infinite client timeouts means that you leak resources. And so you don't want people to be able to change that. And so that's what the default and override is for, is that sort of cascading, it controls the cascading behavior of the policy. And I think that's the other thing that's really important to remember about policy, is that it does cascade.
One way we might be able to leverage policies as well, if we're not doesn't overload it, but ways we could extend the standard API so that people that want certain functionality. Again, I think Rob using like load balancing as an example. We can have a standardized policy for load balancing. So this is a load balancing type of policy, and standardized parameters, similar to like what Nick you mentioned with the TLF.
Yeah, and so I guess the other thing that I'm hoping for with the policy mechanisms is that over time we should be able to drive the set of policy objects towards some sort of consensus for products that, for implementations that have similar behaviors. So I would kind of anticipate that, say, to use timeouts again, that all of the Envoy-based, all of the things that use Envoy as their data plane should probably end up with like an envoy timeout policy or something like that. That because the data plane is the thing that sets the time, like how the timeouts work. And so like in my mind, this is a great example of how we all do our own thing, but we come to this forum and we sort of try to say, hey, how about we all try to do something a bit similar so that we can get back to what I feel is the core deliverable of this project, and that's interoperability and ease of migration. Right? Like we all want people to be able to move their config as seamlessly as possible, as far as possible between different implementations.
Yeah, and I think there might be room for like, bifurcation, so to speak, of policies too, right? Like, so you're saying, let's be cognizant of L4 and L7. I can see a whole set of a slew of L4, like TCP window timeout policies for the L4 piece, or do you want IP tables or BPF sort of work at the L4 layer versus whatever we're going to do at L7? I think there will be overlap, but yeah, we'll probably want to allow room for some like multiple sets at your different layers.
This is a really good discussion. Thank you again, Shane, for bringing this up. I want to ask for a volunteer here. Can anyone capture this in an issue? I mean, I think the end goal here is to write docs, but before we get to that point, can we capture an issue of just what we discussed here and what our docs are currently missing or need to discuss?
I can take a swag at it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you all.
Thanks again, Shane. That was a good question, man.
Yeah.
You've been asking all the great questions lately, man.
Completely agree on that. Okay, so next week I'm going to be off. It's President's Day in the US. I am open if anyone is going to be around to obviously feel free to have a meeting, but I won't be here. So is anyone else going to be here next week and interested in meeting?
Well, I'm in Australia, so I don't have a holiday, so I can be here if anyone else is going to be here. But yeah, I'd rather not show up and sit here silently for 7 minutes while I wait for anyone else to. So.
Nick, I think you may be the only one that would be here.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. So what I'm going to suggest is that we do a lazy consensus thing of, speak now if you don't want the meeting to be cancelled, and if otherwise, then I'll take 1 hour back in my day.
I will, unless we hear anything else. Let's plan on canceling. Definitely ping in Slack or elsewhere if you're interested in meeting, but otherwise, like you said, lazy consensus. We can all have an hour back. Cool. All right. So on that note, I've just kind of by default been leading meetings for a while. I'm not tied to that by any stretch of the imagination. And I realized that it's been a while since I've mentioned, hey, anyone else can lead if they want to. So I'll throw that out there again. If anyone is interested in leading meetings and sharing the load, whatever, just leading one every now and then, I would love some diversity, some different people leading. So by all means, volunteer, ping me or on Slack or wherever. Yeah. Cool.
Rob, I'm willing to share the load with you.
Oh, awesome. That would be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I've already said I would, and then got cold feet last week. But yeah, I definitely am interested in helping as well. But I should say that basically all of the only things that are required are that you end up with the hosting key so that you can share your screen, and then be the one who runs through the agenda. That's it. So yeah, it's not that bad.
Cool.
Basically an MC.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, awesome. I'll reach out to you after to figure out a schedule where we can get some more people leading here. But thanks for volunteering. And if you haven't, but you're interested, just ping me or any maintainer, and we'll get you on the schedule. Cool. All right, so there's actually a bunch of PR triage. I haven't been paying as much attention to issues. So if someone is aware of issues that we should discuss, let's do that. But I know there's some big PRs that are just sitting right now, and I want to make sure we have time for them. I'm not even going to cover this PR because I've looked at it and I just ran out of time to test it locally before I merged it, but it seems very straightforward. It's a single dependency bump. Nick, you have a big PR, a complicated PR here that I have no idea how to test.
Yeah,
congratulations.
Yeah, I'm like, how do I even test if Prow is going to build images? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm pretty confident that I've got it mostly right. It's not that big a change to what we do already, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I'll
I
have
don't
a
know
look.
what SIG can help us. Maybe it's test infra. I don't know, but whoever can help us with this. Yeah, I mean, this looks largely reasonable to me. I had a few little nits, comments, questions, whatever, but I mean, without really knowing how we can test this seems like a reasonable first direction.
I think the hardest thing was kind of figuring out, this part that's in that little bulleted list there. So all images will be labeled with like the Prow version string. Images built for like a branch, a Semver branch or tag are labeled with the branch or tag name. So when we do a release, we get you can use V041 as your admission controller tag label, container image label, and then images built with a RC with a pre-release marker, they are not labeled latest. Yeah, so and then the one that does any Semver tags that don't have the pre-release marker will be pushed to latest will be set to that for the people who are like to live on the bleeding edge and put latest in their manifests, like, and fly by the seat of their pants. So that's a good point, Rob. I'll ask around and see if I can get someone from who knows the testing infra to review it, or to find out if there's a way that we can test this.
Cool. Yeah, no, thank you for taking this on. I know this is something that we will all, I mean, it's really a beta, something that we require for beta. So I'm glad to see this getting some traction. Yeah, thanks.
There's a few other related things that I haven't got to yet. I wanted to do this one first, but then there's like updates so that we do build X and build for ARM and stuff like that as well. And then figure out how we push to prod and a bunch of other stuff like that when we are ready to push to prod.
Cool. Awesome. All right, so next I see Richard, you're on this call. And I noticed you had pushed an update or set of updates to the PR. Any high-level summary of what's changed?
Sure. So one big semantic change is I actually defined a different merge semantic for when an HTTP route and a gRPC route have the same host name, or they share a host name space. And that was driven by bouncing the original idea off of some more people, and they pointed out that there are some use cases where you may want HTTP route to win out, or you may want gRPC route to win out. So it gets a little bit complicated because of the way that services and methods are mapped down to HTTP2 URIs, but I think you can read through there and it mostly makes sense. It does end up using regexes in some places, but only in places, mostly in places where you're using regular expressions in the gRPC route API. Other than that, it's mostly just filling out doc strings, pretty boilerplatey expected stuff. I know it's a big PR, so I imagine people will want to like read through it in detail before commenting on it. So I'm fine if there are no comments today.
Yeah, this is, thank you. Thank you for leading this and for getting this update in. I had not really thought about how, HTTP route merging is complicated enough, and layering on more merging on top of that is fun. I need to, thank you for laying it out this way. I mean, it looks logical, but I need to spend some time thinking about it a bit more.
So there is one detail here that is a little bit rough from my perspective, which is like, so looking at this bulleted list here, the first three I think make sense, but there's a fourth one that's missing before the catch-all case, which is what if you want to match a method, but like a specific method, but you want to match all services. So the encoding in gRPC is /service/method. Now you need a suffix matcher, and there's no suffix matcher within an HTTP route, so you can't translate it down. The only way you can do it is with regexes. So that case actually falls into the last one. The problem is that you want, that's an exact match from the perspective of gRPC that can only be expressed in terms of a regex match from HTTP route, and regex match is, what is it, custom support, something like that within HTTP. So it's difficult, right? Like maybe the solution there is to introduce a suffix matcher or something, but that might have a bunch of other unintended consequences. So another option I'd thought about is like, well, maybe you say specifying a method but not a service in gRPC is considered like custom support or something like that, because it has this dependency on regexes. Anyway, it is kind of tricky.
Yeah, that is quite the rabbit hole. Yeah, thank you for calling that out. I don't have a good answer or thought to this one yet. One thing, while we're discussing this gap, do you have an idea of approximate timeline, or is there a goal you had for getting this in and implemented? We're nearing a V1 beta 1 release. Is it fine if this were to slip and be the second release? It's still V1 beta 1, but later on in the process, or is this something like you really want to get in sooner than later?
I mean, I'd like to get it in as soon as possible, right? Like, if you can tell me how unreasonable each of these milestones it would be to get it into, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it'll just depend on review bandwidth here, because I think you've definitely spent a fair amount of time coming up with a reasonable proposal. So we just need to spend some time reviewing it, and I'm not sure I'll have to maybe defer to others in the community as far as timeline and what we think is reasonable, or what kind of capacity we have here.
So I don't think this will make E1 beta 1, but like, what is the AS? Because I heard ASAP sort of, but like, is there a specific target that you're shooting for?
No, just as soon as reasonable to amend that. I mean, V1 beta 2, would that be the next milestone after V1 beta 1?
So yeah, to clarify, our versions are a little weird in that it will still be V1 beta 1 of the API, but we'll have like different bundle versions. That it's kind of like, if you're familiar with Kubernetes versioning, there's V1 beta 1 of Ingress as an example, and then we make additions to it in Semver versions of Kubernetes. So V1.20 added something to Ingress API as an example. I could be wrong on the exact version, but that idea. So I think what is likely is our next release is V0.5.0. Maybe gRPC route makes it into V0.6.0. Okay.
And roughly speaking, how much of a time gap is there between those versions?
that is as good a guess as I think the shortest we've done in between releases is around 3 months. Okay. And the longest is what, 6 to 9 months, somewhere in that range.
Cadence is undefined at the moment, though.
Yeah,
we don't have like any sort of. It's been very hey, we need to cut a release to get this thing in. So I mean, would we cut a release to include this when it's ready? I would say yes.
So I think like there's two things. One of them is getting the proposal in and into experimental. The other one is to actually see enough implementations to catch up to understand whether the proposal makes sense. And I think that one is the one that takes a lot longer.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a good point. The flow here will be, and again, this is the versioning is a bit complex because of this is like this is a upstream API group CRD, and we're the first ones to do this, so we're kind of figuring it out as we go. So, but the way that it'll work is once we bring in so GEP gets approved, we bring in like the structs that you've, something like the structure you've got in the GEP into the experimental CRD set. So we will have to cut a release to do that. So that will be some version bump, probably 050, 050 or 060 or something like that. But that, so there will be a version bump to have the CRD included in the CRDs in the experimental release train of the CRDs. And then and then that means that implementers are free to pick up the experimental CRDs at that release, and then the gRPC route CRD will be available for implementers to actually try out and implement. Once we've had some people actually try out the thing and like implement it and see how it is to implement for them, there may be changes that we would need to do. And so the gRPC route resource will stay in the experimental chain until we're all confident that the way we've got it makes sense and stuff. And then once that's done, it'll move into the stable release at V1 beta 1 probably, because adding a new CRD is it doesn't require a version rev of the actual V1, the API group version. It does require a bundle version and moving from experimental to stable.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so it sucks because we've got 3 dimensions of versioning. We're way out in the weeds about versioning. So, but yeah, in order to be able to do stuff, it just makes a bunch of other stuff slightly easier. So,
okay.
Sorry, it's a bit complicated, but that's where I think it'll be.
So my side is just, I don't want to rush the process, but also I don't want to unnecessarily dawdle. So, whatever is reasonable.
That makes complete sense. Thanks for working with us, and thanks for keeping this up to date and keeping it moving.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Awesome. Let's move on to the next one. Oh, did not mean to do. Whoa. That's fun. Did not mean to do that either. Hopefully everyone can see my screen again. The shortcut for restoring previously closed tab apparently pauses screen sharing. Anyways, lesson learned. Next up is the gRPC route destination port matching. Chow pushed an update today. I think, let's see, I think I just had 1 or 2 little nitpicks on this, but it looked good to me. But there haven't been as many people commenting or reviewing this one. This is an implementation for an already approved GEP. I don't think Chow's not on this meeting. Yeah, so the thing I kind of wanted to call out just more broadly is right now we don't have a way to differentiate between stable and experimental docs. Yay. So I suggested just experimental, parentheses. But this is something like that we could probably improve. So when I see a new feature like this, one of the first things I look at is it modifying anything in the stable CRD? Because it shouldn't be. And it is. And what it's modifying is it's referring to, in this case, when we have both port and, section name specified, what does it do? And port is unknown in this space. So this is just kind of a machinery thing, a limitation of our experimental implementation. I think it's okay, but just calling it out if anyone has a better idea here. And beyond that, I guess I'll just, if anyone wants to wait for anything else to get added, I think Harry had a couple comments. I think they've been resolved, but if anyone else has an opinion, otherwise I think we can get this one in pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'll try and take a look at this one today.
Cool. Thanks. That was destination port matching. Oh, I completely missed this. Oh, no, I didn't miss this one. This is there's one lagging comment that I think the author missed, and we can just ping them, because I think they already made one fix, and then it's just like one additional fix that, yeah. Okay. A name field to, okay, before I go down that rabbit hole, I feel like we spent a bit too much time on that one. Let me at least get into conformance test. This is just sitting here for a minute. Oh, this is on me. I missed one bit of feedback. If anyone else has anything, let me know. I probably need to rebase now. It just kind of sat for a minute. But I would like to get this in. We're at the point where we're trying to run these conformance tests against our own implementation locally, and it would just be easier if we had a few more conformance tests to run with.
I will hit this one today too, Rob.
Cool, thanks.
Yep, we're looking to make some additional contributions to the performance tests too here in the next week or two.
That'd be awesome. Cool, great. Yeah, so all right. Before we get into this last thing of named HTTP route, are there other things we should be discussing? Are there issues, PRs, anything else? Okay, here we go. So this one, we have had a lot of variety of opinions on this one. Apparently not captured in this PR itself.
Actually in the GEP thing, if you look at the GEP issue down the bottom.
Thank you. This one, thank you. Yes.
So Rob, suggestion I would have is that, and I apologize that I didn't have once again, didn't get the route inclusion delegations proposal ready for today, but I will have it for week after next. And I think we should just defer discussion on this one to that, because there's a strong interplay between them. And I think if we figure out how we want to do route inclusion delegation, that how we actually want to implement it as far as where you can plug in a route inclusion, I think that'll help go towards answering what we want to do with the naming in routes, but whether it's matching naming matches and things like that.
That sounds like a very reasonable approach to me. I think we've probably exhausted the discussion we can have on this without understanding route inclusion, and with route inclusion or delegation coming up so quickly, I am okay with waiting till our next meeting to discuss this further.
I guess, sorry.
Go ahead.
I guess what I would say is, Jeff, could you maybe once you have the doc ready, put it in the channel, and that way we can all pre-read the doc and stuff and come prepared to the meeting.
Yep, that's exactly what I plan to do.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, it's no problem at all. It's no problem at all. This is a really hard design, man. So writing a doc for it is really hard, and I've had that sort of problem too. You're sitting there and you're like, oh no, you got to get this. The wording needs to be just so and stuff. I think particularly for this one, the important part is that we have some options to discuss rather than the options are too final.
Yeah, that's what one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to show a couple of different options so that we can debate the pros and cons of them, and maybe we decide we want to go one direction, then we can refine it from there.
Yeah, definitely. So the other thing that I just remembered I needed to do is I said I was going to talk to API Machinery about it. I did talk to them. I did hear in the end, and the answer was it depends on what your users want. And so I think in terms of, I think that it really does come down to the delegation and inclusion discussion, and so it's really good to sort of, I think Rob, one of us needs to comment on at least this PR, probably just to say, hey, we're just going to hold off on this until we've nailed down a direction about the route inclusion and delegation, or whatever we're going to call it. We need to pick a name as well. And that way we can just say, okay, what that does do though is that puts, because depending on what we do here, I think it's pretty unlikely at this point, but there is a small chance that we might need to rev the alpha API before we go to beta if things turn out specific ways in this. So this is a blocker for beta. So which means, you know, all of these things are blockers for beta. There's plenty of other blockers for beta as well, but this is sort of another, probably the biggest design blocker for beta. There's a bunch of mechanical stuff like the image things, a bunch of other stuff, but this is like the biggest design. This is the only design blocker for beta.
I'm delaying getting the proposal together, just trying to increase everybody's stress level about the beta timing.
Yeah. I mean, I think as long as we can have, so in my mind, as long as we can have, if we can be talking about beta at KubeCon EU, that would be ideal.
Yeah, I just submitted a talk proposal and maintainer track on Friday that assumes we've been at beta and we're describing that. So here's hoping we're at beta by KubeCon EU.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think that seems achievable, to be honest.
Yeah. So, and hopefully well before then, but with that said, I want to highlight, Nick, what you were saying about the version rep, because that is what makes me nervous about this discussion. And I just want to call that out, that if we were to make name a required field, which is one of the options being discussed here, that is a breaking change in all technicality. It requires a version ref to V1 Alpha 3. I really, really strongly want to avoid that, but we just, that is my top priority. The rest, if we can guarantee that we can avoid that, then everything else becomes not necessarily a blocker for beta. But if we think there's a possibility that's going to happen, then this stays in the category of could block beta. So it's not even necessarily that we need the full solution. We just need enough of the solution to say one way or another if this is going to be a required field. And hopefully route inclusion can help with that, or delegation can help provide some clarity around this.
Yeah, 100% agreed.
I think we may have reached the end of topics then. I can volunteer, like you mentioned, Nick. One of us should. I'll volunteer since I'm already here. I'll leave this tab open and respond and just add a note for what we're thinking. Mention Jeff, so he's looped in too. And yeah, I think that's all for today. Any last topics, or give everyone back 15 minutes?
Let's discuss delegation. No, just kidding.
All right. Awesome. We'll have a good couple weeks. We will not have a meeting next week unless we hear something like in the next 5-10 minutes. But yeah, more than likely, I'll just go ahead and cancel that. And we'll see everyone in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks.